Okay, Martina, what are we doing?
We are going to do an interview, and I'm just going to ask you some questions, and you just answer them to your abilities.
Right.
Okay, so can you start by introducing yourself?
My name is Alec Couros. I'm a professor of educational technology and media at the University of Regina. Am I looking at Martina, or am I looking at you?
You can just look at Martina.
Sure, okay.
Okay. All right, so here's the first question for you. How did you go from being a rural teacher to being a professor at the University of Regina?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I started in Duck Lake. I spent most of my time in Humboldt, Saskatchewan. Eventually, I moved to Saskatoon. Saw an ad in the paper. So I worked here a couple of years, SIIT, and I saw an ad in the paper for sort of a tech position at the University of Regina, and I just applied. It was interesting because I was actually a history and English teacher, and then when I came into a school, just because I was younger at the time, they said, "Hey, you're young, so you must know something about computers." And so then I was teaching computer courses and computer science courses, and so it went from English being my passion to technology, and obviously things changed. Technology didn't go away. The internet became more of a bigger thing. Social media exploded, and so a big part of what I teach now is really understanding our world in the social media context. In a more connected world. So it makes sense. I mean, it's a pretty I wouldn't say a normal career progression, but it's I guess I've kept up with current trends, certainly.
So would you say that's how you first got interested in the education sector?
Well, I'm not even sure why. I think I started first by getting a job and then becoming interested. Just looking, this stuff is okay. But I think it was when I first. I don't know if this gets too nerdy here, but I read a book around when I was doing my doctoral work. I read a book that really excited me, and it was about. It was called The Cathedral and the Bazaar, and it was around how people create software. And so the old way of creating software is what they call a cathedral approach. Like everything's really top-down and structured, and certain people have access to code and create it. Whereas the open source or the bazaar method is like everyone having the ability to add code and to create things. So things like Linux, for instance, Apache, and a lot of things on the internet were created by just volunteers across the web. And so I see that as a bit of a metaphor for how we actually can communicate, collaborate, and cooperate as humans. And so, although that's about code, but how do we do that with some of the things I mentioned in my talk today, whether it's the Star Wars Uncut thing or the virtual choir, or there was actually a really cool project called the $100 project, where basically someone put out 10,000 little tiny pieces of artwork, and so people were paid 1 penny to recreate what they saw on a little frame. So they kind of created this on the internet. They didn't know what they were doing, but then this guy put them all together, and it was like $100 bills. So it was kind of amazing. So no one knew individually what they were doing, but all together they created a $100 bill, which is kind of amazing. And I think it's like the 10,000. I think it's called 10,000 cents if you want to look it up. But it's kind of a cool idea how little actions can create something bigger that we don't even know about.
How do you think technology impacts face-to-face communication?
So this is interesting. I mean, I think a lot of people I talk to, young people like yourself, sometimes find it difficult to actually maintain face-to-face communication, especially if they've been texting. I think sometimes it's interesting to see how some people shy away from it, but then they become really, really good at emoting online. Like I read an article not too long ago about the use of periods in texting, meaning once you've added a period to your, like all of a sudden you're really serious. And it's like, what, are you mad at me or something? And you said, yeah, period. Like, and it's kind of interesting to see how even we've become better at actually showing emotion. No one told us that period is serious, but people pick it up very quickly. It's no longer sort of that kind of fun-loving, normal texting, and all of a sudden you've got punctuation in there, and it's really serious. Or capitals. What are you doing with capitals, right? So it's interesting to see how certainly it becomes more difficult in some ways, and I think we still have to practice it. I think the more that we do something, the more that we practice communicating face to face, we pick it up. But and it shows that in texting world, some of the things that we miss, the emotes, come through emojis or come through the way that we actually put together our sentences. So not all is lost. We still have the basics. We just have to understand how to do that in all contexts.
How do you think it impacts people's mental health?
So there's a lot of things around Facebook, for instance. Like Facebook is pretty sinister. In fact, they've played with. There's been wide-scale experimentations where they actually decide, okay, you million users, what we're going to do to you is we're going to filter out happy things from your feed, and then we'll do like nothing but happy things on other people's feed, and then they actually see what those people will post. So they basically, if you're fed sad things, then you start writing sad things, and it actually changes your mental health. So we have to understand how social networks, how our use of technology, like for instance, even people who are addicted to likes. Like if you post something and you're sitting there waiting for the first like or comment, that becomes addicting. I mean, it's very much like a drug because you're looking for some sort of stimulus response, right? So you created something and you're waiting for something. And so people who have left Facebook or Instagram for some time actually show signs of being more happy in some cases. So certainly social media, especially social media when we spend too much time on it or we're not very balanced, can negatively affect our mental health, and it becomes a real problem. Another thing that's really kind of interesting, and I'd ask you to Google ESPN split image. So ESPN split image. It's a really interesting story about a girl who looked perfect, like she was that perfect athlete, amazing student. She looked great on social media, and then she ended up committing suicide. And it was one of those things where you see everything as a highlight reel. Like you don't really know the person online when you're only posting certain things online. And that's one thing that has a lot of negative repercussions on us. Is that, for instance, if I look at someone else's life online and everything is really amazing because they're not posting any of the negative stuff, I compare my life to this amazing life, and that actually is really bad for our mental health in many ways. So we have to understand what we do, and so there's been so there's something like there's fake Instagram, which is basically actually more real than the real Instagram. It's this idea that people are actually posting the reality rather than sort of the happiest moments of their lives, and so it's kind of bringing back that authentic self that's sad and happy, and anyway. So I think we have to, it's all about balance ultimately. So you probably got more content than you need.
No, that was good. Do you think that the difference in internet access between urban and rural areas is creating a new communication barrier, like for instance, new language barriers?
It's creating a new digital divide. It's allowing people who are typically in really low connectivity situations cannot participate in the economy, they can't participate in education, they can't participate in business, in social life, relationships, in the same way that people in urban settings can. So it's really creating a digital divide. Now, certainly you get through and people are able to make, get around things, but it's not giving you the same access, does not give you the same access to other opportunities, and I think that's the negative part. So although you seem to be, obviously people are thriving and they're happy, and so on, it's the missed opportunities that you'll never know about, I think, that become the issue.
I can relate to that. I live on farms.
Right, yeah, right. So you don't know sometimes what you're missing by being disconnected or having poor internet, or just, the daily, you have to endure having, really slow download speeds or having to use a cell phone booster or whatever the technology might be. It becomes trying and difficult. And so the things that take a kid in the city seconds, it's taking you hours to do. And that becomes a real issue, right?
Yeah. Okay, so are there any tells for a site that might be a negative site, like Yik Yak, that needs to be avoided?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there's Yik Yak, I don't know how, I've never seen a really good example of Yik Yak in terms of how it's being used. I mean, I've seen some people, high school students who, see the abuse on something like Yik Yak, and so they'll use Yik Yak in very positive ways and make sure that they only upload positive things. So I think most sites can be reverted or changed in a way so that they're much more positive. But what was the point of having it in the first place? Like, it just becomes like, why use it? Even Snapchat, it was set up as a fairly sinister idea. It was meant, when it was first created, to exchange photographs that are inappropriate, right? But it's become much more than that. I mean, if I want to see what happens in my own life when I'm gone today, what I'll do at the end of the day is I'll go and see my wife's Snapchat, and I'll see all the things that are happening, the little moments that I missed, and then hopefully she'll download it so I can actually see it, because it's really kind of nice, because it's those every little moments of, like, the laughter of my kids, the moments that I miss gives me some greater context, so it makes me feel more connected in many ways. So I really kind of like the idea of the stories feature, and I actually like, one of the things I really like about Snapchat is it gives your generation the ability to actually, like, some things can be less permanent. Like, everything's potentially up there forever, but at least it gives you a little bit of a reprieve from everything being totally permanent. It gives you what we had as a generation, ephemera, which is basically things kind of disappearing, right? And you guys are disadvantaged in that respect, that idea that everything is going to be on your record forever. And I think, you have to work out some way of doing that. There's a really interesting article, an Onion video, like I showed the Blockbuster one, but there's one that's around, in 2040, they're looking for a GOP candidate and a Republican candidate in the United States, and they can't find anyone because everyone's got, like, bad social media. So they look for people under boxes who have lived homeless lives or whatever else, because those are the only people who haven't been on the internet. And so they may not be educated, but at least they don't have a bad social media profile. And so that's sort of the situation, is like you're having an entire generation of people who will have, I could say it's questionable, but I can just say, normal, right? It's become normal. It's the things that we don't want to see on there, right? And I'm sure as a high school kid, I wouldn't wanted every moment of my life on Facebook or on YouTube. So I think it's tougher in many ways for you guys.
So what advice can you give to those of us that would like to survive in this digital world?
I think obviously having a positive digital identity is an important part of my talk, making sure that you're connected. So when I Google you, I should be able to find your best things about you. I think you should get a domain name, like those sort of things. Buying a domain name, so you actually, rather than being a renter in the digital space, you actually own a house. It's your space, so when people Google you, it's the place that they find you. And I think that's going to be more important when you look at recruitment, developing your own identity. It's going to be important with relationships, like controlling some aspect of your identity is really an important piece. Also having some sort of rules around your own friendships. Like when you go out to places, make sure that there's an understanding of what you want to be posted, because you might become a teacher or a professional. Other students, other one of your friends may go into non-professional fields that perhaps don't have the same code of ethics, and so they may have very different ideas around what to post online and what to post online. And so it's important for you to understand, especially if you have diverging pathways, to make sure that there's some understanding that, if I'm becoming a teacher or a doctor or something else, I need to have this sort of social media presence. So if you post something about me, you're hurting my future. And so having that understanding amongst friends, and I don't think anyone means to hurt people, it's just sometimes these things get on. I noticed a few years ago there was a guy there was a Saskatchewan Wanderer contest, which was basically, have you heard of that? So there was a guy from Prince Albert who was going to get it. He had a really great social media profile, but then he was at a Rider game. So one of his friends posted him singing kind of an off-color song about the Edmonton Eskimos, and that emerged on social media, and he becomes disqualified. Everything else is perfect except that little video that comes out. And I think so we hurt our friends when we don't recognize what we post about them online. So I think having some empathy, having some sense, and having some rules, I think, are really important things for young relationships.
That's really good advice. Thank you.
Oh, I hope so.
Is there anything else you want to?
No, I think that's good. I mean, stay connected and use social media well, and I think you'll be okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you very much for the interview.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot. Thanks for